Hello, I'm Mark.
And I'm Michelle,
We are
Medicine
Medicine
with the
with the
Metals.
Metals.
Today we have Larry Norris, and he is one of the co founders of Decriminalize Nature, which is a really important cause, especially one that we believe in strongly.
Absolutely. Going to be a great conversation today.
Yeah, let's jump right into it.
It's been quite a little journey. We started Decriminalize Nature in late 2018, 2019, right around this time of year, actually. We were at our first conversations. And then our conversations really were initially around, building a sort of a conscious community center. We were talking about, wouldn't it be great if we could include entheogens into that process, or psychedelic plants and mushrooms, basically. We started talking about Oregon and Colorado, and figuring out what's the difference between decriminalization and legalization, and also what are the different plants that might want to talk about. So that started our journey about a little over 5 years ago now, and it's been quite an incredible experience ever since. Before that, I originally from Michigan area, studied neuroscience when I was an undergrad. Had to do a lot of animal research. Decided that was not the thing for me. Was much more interested in like sort of the inner experiences that people having from psychedelics. What is consciousness? What is the nature of reality? What are these big questions that we sort of dismiss nowadays with so much emphasis on neuroscience? Oh well, it's just these neuronal mechanisms in the brain, but it doesn't explain this hard problem of consciousness that David Chalmers talks about.
Absolutely.
So I was like, okay, well, this is not really where I want to be going. Fortunately, that's where the industry went, is went more towards neuroscience. But really, at the end of the day, when I do stuff with integration circles, I have a nonprofit called Entheogenic Research Integration Education. And we've been doing integration circles since about 2011, bringing people together, talk about their inner experience. They're always talking about these profound inner worlds that they're seeing, right? They're never saying, my frontal lobe was lit up. They're never saying, oh yeah, I felt more serotonin in my brain or any of these things. So yeah, we can talk about neuroscience, but it's like, looking at a phone that's off and saying, oh yeah, there's all these connections here, but not really knowing how exactly they're working or what's that sort of jump over to something new. So that's always been kind of my interest. I did my dissertation research looking at ayahuasca archetypes of transformation and how do people help people with the meaning making process. So what are people going through? What types of big transformative sudden shifts? Keyword being sudden shift, something that happens in an hour, a couple hours, and all of a sudden that person's changed forever that impacts them still many, many years down the road. So that's always been my background. Then I came across this, like I said, community, discussing decrimination stuff. And I jumped into policy because I was like, well, I can, teach people about all these things I've learned over the years. And then the policy part, I just came to realize like, wow, we all need to know about policy. If we really want to be engaging, this is, direct democracy. We really want to engage. We got to actually get out there and do it. Otherwise the big money is always going to do it. And they're always going to do it for their benefit, not for the benefit of the people. So it's nice to kind of learn the process, and we train people, monthly. We have a monthly orientation to give people the tools of how to shift policy for entheogens. But at the end of the day, it's really shifting policy for anything. So I think that's really an interesting sort of side note that maybe I'm sure people are getting the hang of it. But once you get the hang of how to, write up a resolution, how to talk to a city council member, how to lobby, how to like do this, the connections, build your community, all that kind of stuff, pretty much everything's on the table in terms of change that you can do. So we started this, like I said, 2019. It kind of blew up since then. I think now there's 25 to 27 cities that we've been directly involved with, whether it's, training them or, people using resources or whatever else, and most of the places I think we have California with the most. I think the policies here, about 6 cities affecting
Hmm.
1.5 million people. Michigan is second with about 1.1 million people. They have about 5 or 6 cities. Then Washington with about 800,000. And then I think Massachusetts with around 300,000. And then Maine with about 68,000. So it's been quite a journey. And in those 5 years, we haven't heard any big concerns. There hasn't been any increases in public emergencies. You have the RAND report last year that said 8 million people had tried mushrooms last year. So even if you have like 5 people that had a bad experience, you hear about the headlines of the guy tries to take the plane down on mushrooms, right? All
Yeah.
that stuff that they're trying to do, which, you read it a little bit further. The second to last paragraph says, oh, well, actually he took him 2 days before he got on the plane. Our headline, that's not a good clickbait headline. So we need to put that at the very end so people miss that. So those stories do happen. It's bound to happen. It's like culture is emerging. We're rebuilding culture after something's been criminalized for so long. We're learning the right ways to do it again, the way to be safe and responsible. And there's one of the original co-founding members with us would always say, more people have died taking selfies and all these substances combined.
You are so true. I love everything about you. You nailed some great things like integration. Like you talk profound. You know what? Being on this path for such a while, like me and Michelle have, you just find somebody that's passionate like you are, and you just feel it. So it's really cool. And like we're talking to an audience right now, so let's kind of dive into like what is the difference between, because there is a huge difference between decriminalized and legalization, because there is a difference. So can you explain that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So all this is based upon the fact that these are criminalized in the first place. Like you don't have to legalize air, you don't have to legalize water, you don't have to legalize anything else. They're not against the law, et cetera, et cetera, you know. But when it comes to these substances, you know, there's this criminal penalty. So a lot of the people are going out there and they're working on legalization frameworks. Unfortunately, the way that the legalization frameworks are working right now, you have, for example, things that are going, I don't know, where are you all located at?
Florida.
Florida.
Florida. Great. Oh, great. So we have some good teams in Florida too. We'll talk about that maybe in a bit. But Oregon, for example, we have the legalization framework, and you know, it's got to be, you know, all these licenses that need to happen. It's got to be at the special service center. It's got to, you know, all these issues and challenges. They need to have a camera doing data collection, which is kind of like already like for me, like I would rather not have someone from the state for my experience, right? And you know, and you know, there are people that are out there trying to do good work and keep the costs low, but there's so many regulatory hoops they got to jump through. Next thing you know, it's $3,000 to $5,000 for an individual to have an experience. Now, the reason I pick out Oregon is because they had a decriminalization framework that ended up getting repealed, which was 110. But
Hmm.
even with that decriminalization framework, it was still a felony to pick a mushroom out of the ground, despite the fact in Oregon it's super prolific and they grow everywhere, and it's still a felony to grow a mushroom. So it like kind of says, okay, well, if you want to do it on your own, you're still a criminal. This is the legalization framework. Some people call it prohibition light, right? In this framework, you're okay. Anything
Yeah.
outside of that, you're still criminal, right?
Right.
And
Mhm.
decriminalization or descheduling or removing criminal penalties or however you want to call it, really the intention here is how do we get rid of that punitive approach to entheogenic plants and mushrooms? How do we make sure that someone can share it with a friend? You know, and we're not saying throw it on every street corner. We're not saying shove it down everyone's throats. Like, unfortunately, even the pharma model is saying, oh, there's 300 million people across the world that are suffering from depression. They all need to take psychedelics.
Hmm.
Maybe not the best idea. You know, maybe there's
Sure.
a I shouldn't, you know. I mean, yes, it can be really valuable for folks, but at the same time, you really got to sort of take those slow steps, you know. And so if we let this underground organically emerge, then you have people that are already skilled doing this work for decades, coming above ground, sharing education, sharing information, all that kind of thing. When we talk about decriminalization, again, it's just kind of removing the criminal penalties. It's probably the least that the government has to do, which basically saying stop arresting people. That's going to save you money, and it's going to be less work on your side. Legalization is like, how are we going to regulate this? How are we going to tax this? How are we going to tax it? How are we going to license it? How are we going to do this? And then it's in a structure that is so confined by the state that, you know, it loses its, you know, potential for the magic, if you will, you know, the
So how many states have decriminalized?
well, so this is again the difference between states and cities. So we're working on the city level. So it's a
Okay.
slightly different approach that we're doing. Only Colorado has currently decriminalized. When Denver started off, Denver was in 2019. In May of 2019 is when they passed their decriminalization of psilocybin initiative. 1 month later, Decriminalize Nature in Oakland decriminalized all natural plants and mushrooms that are on Schedule 1, with the exception of a cot. But it was mushrooms with psilocybin and psilocin, cacti with mescaline, plants with ibogaine, and plant combinations similar to ayahuasca that contain DMT. So the only state currently that has that is Colorado. Initially, there was a
Mm.
decrim hooked up with the legalization framework in Oregon, but there's some funders that came in there, thought it was a good idea to split those apart, and they did that, and then they put everything on this bill that decriminalized all substances. Unfortunately, bad timing. It's right in the middle of the pandemic. People were using fentanyl overdoses and things like that, which, you know, again, there's a variety of reasons that could happen. That reason to repeal that. So we're not, you know, for throwing people in jail for any substances, but also we see that there's different levels of risk and different levels of infrastructure and different levels of treatment that needs to happen if you are to make sure that people aren't getting arrested for these types of things. Unfortunately, because of the fentanyl and those types of things, the overdose deaths and the open air drug markets, as they're calling them, and everything like that, that also means that the mushrooms are illegal again. And outside of this $3,000 to $5,000 framework, you know, ibogaine, ayahuasca, plants that actually could help with treatment issues, and they never even
Absolutely.
incorporated it in. But yeah, so that would be what happened in Colorado, excuse me, in Oregon. Colorado, when we started, Colorado, the folks in Denver who were kind of the same folks that did the state level thing told us, you know, oh, you can only do mushrooms. That's the only thing people will understand. Nobody knows what these other plants are. We were like, hey, we're in the Bay Area. We're going to try it all anyway because all the communities are here. right? So, you see in some of these, like, after we passed it, it's like nobody even really cares about the other plants. It's like, place decriminalizes mushrooms and other psychedelic plants. We're like, "Okay, well, let's just keep going with this," right? So after we passed, at some point in time, we had, significantly more cities that had passed all nature than had passed just mushrooms, with Denver being the only one and an Oregon later down the road. And so when Colorado came back to do a ballot initiative, we had some local teams there, Decrim Nature teams in Boulder and um, Colorado Springs and other places that are really pushing for this larger plant model. And so what they did on their ballot initiative is they actually went for the four categories of plants that we've been talking about, which is great. They ended up passing it. They didn't do the all substances, so it'll be harder, I think, for them to repeal it there. There's this constant back and forth with legislatures, though, who want to like
Mhm.
repeal the rights of the individual and say, okay, now that you voted on this, we want to sort of chip away at what you voted on so we have more control. So you do see that happening, unfortunately. But currently, Colorado's the only state that has this. And then, as I mentioned, six cities in California, Oakland, where we started, San Francisco, Berkeley, Arcata, Humboldt County, Eureka, Santa Cruz. In Washington, you have Port Townsend, Jefferson County, Seattle, Olympia, I think just recently passed in August. And I might be missing one there. And so you have these little cities scattered out, but you definitely have these pockets where these states are more prolific, like California, Washington, Michigan, Massachusetts.
It's pretty amazing though with the movement that's happening right now. And we have a other business besides what we do here. We have Mama Dose, and it's a psilocybin business where we microdose and macrodose, and it's pretty amazing. And I can just tell you the people, I mean, 8 million number that you just mentioned. Wow, that's like a lot of people in the last year that have tried psilocybin. But I think the majority of people do not because of this part of it, because they think they're going to get in trouble. And we think of the benefits. I mean, you just mentioned four plants: ibogaine, psilocybin, um, botrema peyote, and ayahuasca, DMT. Every one of these I have experience with, and probably so have you, and so has my wife. But I'm just going to say, every one of these have been so beneficial, like mind wise, and like there hasn't been one like bad effect from these, and I always I love the two aspects of this, but I think this underground way is just the only way to go because they pushing it the other way is just gonna ruin this. I mean,
Well, we were in Vancouver last year at a conference, a psychedelic conference, and Vancouver had decriminalized all drugs, and it was a mess. It was a mess. The streets were a mess. It was a mess.
I think we really have to educate people on like these plants, like what we've classified as like schedule ones, these have been around for millions of years. I mean, people have been healing with these plants forever and ever. I mean, we've just really restricted these plants in the last 100 years. So, I mean, we have to we have to educate people that this is a safe alternative. And I definitely agree. Everybody shouldn't do psychedelics. But I mean, if you dabbled in it and it wasn't for you, you're gonna know pretty quickly. So, I don't know, adverse or not, I think this is such a beautiful pathway to go, and I think what you're doing is pretty amazing. And the education really has to be there because education right now and trust. I mean, those are the two big things that psychedelics need. And we need people like you and us and what we're doing because so many people want to experience this and they want to experiment it. And this is what's keeping them from it. And the legalities is 100%.
Right. And you have legality and different levels of legality too, because you have now, the biggest thing that, sort of my generation, we kind of came up with this 1998 article that came out of the MAPS Bulletin, which is basically saying if you want to get involved with psychedelics, you have to go the medical route, get your medical license, right? So everyone's getting their medical license. Now I have friends who are afraid to do this work because they're afraid of losing their license, right? But
Mhm.
the other side of it is now you have this FDA trial thing to happen, right? And you
Mhm.
have, and I just saw something really great today. It was like, on Twitter or something like that was like DEA is like basically just an enforcement agency for the pharmaceutical companies,
And
right? As soon as we can get prove medical value, we can then let this pharmaceutical company do this thing. But outside of that, it's going to be Schedule One, because we have all these different reasons for it, right?
and it's insanity though. I mean, Larry, it's insanity. It's just I mean, if people really know, like we know, I mean, and until like we always tell people like I'll never go on a big journey, because they're scared. But once they see that journey, once they see that 1, 2, 3 gram therapeutical dose journey, they're like, why haven't I done this before?
Mhm.
It's that education, that information part of it that, that the government has locked these people away from. And doing
Mhm.
what you're doing what we're doing is going to be the key to like opening this pathway up. 8 million people still. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a lot of people that have experimented this year with mushrooms.
Yeah, and especially if you consider, like, how where are the reports, like, you'd expect, given the fear mongering, that there'd be, 4,000,000 reports of, like, horrendous experiences, you're not hearing that
Mhm.
at all, so,
And you
uh
don't hear them. 'Em, you're not hearing those, you don't hear them.
yeah,
You know, I
exactly.
I love all these medicines, but I do think there's a really true healing aspect to, like, ayahuasca and the DMT experiences to be in a proper set and setting, so, I don't really feel about decrim with that, but I think decrim altogether with psilocybin, it's just a beautiful thing right now.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and decrim really it's the only one that opens the door for, like, for example, ayahuasqueros to come in here from somewhere else to do experiences. None of the regulated frameworks are allowing for that. The FDA trials doesn't work for that, and again, that's where I was going to before, is like, every kind of medical model has tried to link this up with assisted psychotherapy. Psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, and they're realizing the FDA can't approve a therapy because it's too variable between each person, between each model, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so now they're gonna have to reconsider how they even do that, which is what they probably should have done in the first place. And some people really consider MAPS to be a little too ambitious to try and get an organization like the FDA to approve something they've never approved before because it's, the best thing for the people. Or is it at all, And then now you see people go about and say, like, in California, there's this bill recently. They had a whole variety of people that could administer, and then you have the senator comes in there and kind of starts wiping everything away. And the next thing you know, it's only surgeons. What do surgeons know? What, again, it's like, who do we put authority or the
Right.
ability to actually be familiar with this? Well, surgeons are the most qualified under the most dangerous conditions. So therefore, they're going to be the most qualified to deal with the mind, although they never really even, or biopsychospiritual model, if you really want to talk about spirit, to be able to do this. So again, and that didn't make it, but it was like, it's fascinating to watch how people jump on this. And even there's this guy in Kentucky, you might have heard about this with, like, the Ibogaine. They're doing that stuff with opioid and Ibogaine, but there's a guy in Kentucky, senator, who was like, "Oh, this is great for our soldiers. This will make them more lethal and more ready." And then you have, like, Rick Doblin and Dana Beal and other folks talking about Ukraine and saying, "Oh, we're going to get this to the Ukrainians on the front line, and it'll be Ibogaine with Ukraine versus Russians on meth." This is a quote they said in the article, right? And it's like, what's happening here? These are the people that are supposed to be, like, leading the charge for a more peaceful world, and they're, like, figuring out how to put these into the war machine. It's
Well,
just
here's the thing though that I find so interesting is we're brought up to believe that it's only the guy or the woman in the white coat that's gonna be able to heal us, right? And
Mhm.
that's or our parents, I mean, that's what we're brought up to believe, that person is gonna heal us, and we don't know enough to heal ourselves. Now, physical ailments, that's something else. Let's just talk mental ailments because I believe my brother's a physician. I believe in Western medicine. There's a time and a place. But here we are being told that it's the doctors that can heal us, but then when we go to do the psychedelics and we learn that this is something we can do on our own or with people guides, integration coaches, the proper information, education, integration. But now the pharmaceutical companies want to take it over. And then now we're going right back to the full circle of now it's the guys in the white coats again.
there's this guy, I forgot his first name. He's about Bears or Bear, I believe Bear. I'm sorry, but here's I don't know if I hear this or not, but apologize if I'm butchering your first name here. But he had this idea when he was saying that the guy in the white coat is, if we believe that ayahuasqueros and other shamans and medicine people work with a little bit of psychopomp elements, we're working with the mind, we're working the placebo, and so people in certain healing situations need to see, a rattle, or need to see a fire, or need to see, soplados, or using tobacco, smoke, or soplados and all that kind of stuff to, like, heal the person. That's what's going to be healing for them. Then they're going to be healing better, right? So he says there's a certain element of people that also need to see the white coat and the stethoscope and the little tiny confined office and the big fluorescent lights, because
Mhm.
that for them is healing. And so that has a healing element, or maybe, obviously not so effective all the time, but that has a little bit of a healing element too. So there is that sort of weird psychopomp kind of experience that happens there. But I think at the end of the day, we know that, you know, the more restricted, the more confined, the more controlled we try to make these experiences, the more challenging it can become. I can't tell you how many
Absolutely.
times I've, like, tried to, like, "Okay, I'm gonna really do this, da 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 da," and then my
Mhm.
It's like, yeah, whatever, or set an intention that's so, specific and it's like, yeah, your intention is not what we're doing today.
Well, and if we're talking about an indigenous medicine, right, like ayahuasca, we support an indigenous tribe, and we
Mhm,
go sit with them in the jungle, and we go and drink ayahuasca, and that's part of it. Of course, mushrooms are different because they're all over, but then you're talking about um, indigenous and what that means, and bringing in the medicine through the indigenous way, and not through a medical way. This seems crazy to me, right? They're talking about making a psilocybin pill, giving everybody a psilocybin pill. You're
mhm.
taking out all the indigenous roots and the importance of the ceremony and all the things, right?
And even extracting that out of the mushroom, there's 4 or 5 different psychoactive properties in a mushroom. Psilocybin is one of them, but you have psilocin, are also criminalized. You also have the beta carbolines, which makes, it's in a very small amount, but almost makes mushrooms an ayahuasca factory because the beta carbolines are similar to the MAOI inhibitors or the the harmalines, right? And then you also have baeocystin and norbaeocystin all in mushrooms. So all that works together in a mushroom experience, except in addition to all the things you're speaking about. And I think even with ayahuasca, it's interesting because yes, you have certain traditions that have explored certain medicines, but there are, I think, close to 4,000 combinations of plants that create this DMT MAOI modulation. And there's, if we believe in plant teacher, plant guide, plant spirit, that means there's 3,990 other plant spirits out there that we need to connect with that nobody knows anything about.
Yeah,
We all
interesting.
were into exploration anyway. And so you're looking at, there, even I've heard of ayahuasca where it's like a prairie grass and something else, or, you hear about, Syrian rue with other things. You hear that some people have stories about the whirling dervishes were working with Syrian rue, maybe potentially a DMT type plant, so there's all these different sort of ancient, and it's all speculative and, whatever else,
Mhm,
but these plants exist. And of course, people are making
exactly.
teas all the time. Oh, let's try this and let's try this and put it together. Whoa, that was a strange experience. Let's keep working with that, And of course,
Yeah.
he's hidden or pushed away as being sort of not true mystical experiences. You hear the scientists always try and say that, is this a true mystical experience or not, right? Compared to somebody else that had a spontaneous one. But, at the same time, you see it just keeps popping up all over. The oldest text was the Rig Veda that talks about the Soma. We don't know what the Soma was, but it's the nectar of the gods. You have the ancient cave paintings in Algeria from 9,000 BC. So that's all 11,000 years ago with the big mushroom bee shaman. You have, peyote traditions, 5,000 plus years old, so this is, again, like you were saying earlier, something that's been around for a really long time.
Of course. And then here we go, the guys in the white suit telling us that, listen, they've told us that we're not allowed to use cannabis, but our whole inner human, how it's function is a cannabinoid system, but we're not allowed to use this fucking plant. Are you kidding me? And then let's talk about DMT in 97% of almost every plant there is out there, and we're not allowed to consume this plant. I mean, it's just really mind-boggling to me that it's just we all know what it is, and it is. It's gonna be depopulation and a control issue is what it's all
Exactly.
about, because if they really wanted to heal us, they wouldn't continue to feed us a pharmaceutical pill that does nothing but numb us. See, and I think we all understand one thing, there's a process, especially I think you nailed a few things, how this underground has to build to teach, and I believe this too. The we need to teach the white coats because
Yeah.
there's a process here. Psilocybin is definitely a mind medicine, but when you talk about DMTs and you talk about ayahuasca and you talk about ibogaine, you're talking about purgatories. You're talking about things that are getting to deep trauma issues, and these are just like everybody doesn't need to jump to ayahuasca, but listen, a lot of the world needs psilocybin. Mind is different than our bodies, and this is where we need to educate these people.
So something like ayahuasca too is or, maybe not, maybe ayahuasca and DMT because I think they're the ones that are probably the most like
Yeah.
for me, when I first had ayahuasca, like the idea of plant teacher, plant guide, plant spirit, that there's worlds beyond, like even with mushrooms, like I was like, okay, maybe this is higher consciousness, maybe these other realms, but like ayahuasca really, I think, like shattered my structured paradigms of being like, okay, wait, this is all there is. And then it
Yeah.
really forced me into it, and not forced, but like, introduced me to the ideas of animism. Like everything's alive, everything has spirit,
No, I think it is a good word. I think forced is a good word because how else do you get there without being listen, you don't see those things if you don't see those things. You don't see that different realm if you've never been to that different realm.
Right.
So we've been there before. So I think we do have to be kind of pushed and forced into that again. At least I had to. And when
Mhm.
I saw that, there was no looking back.
Right, exactly. You can't unlearn those lessons, and I think that when that's what I did little research on in my dissertation was this like this sudden transfer, this quick shift of paradigms. Like yes, we can talk about mental health and mental healing, all that kind of thing, which are subtle shifts in paradigms. This is like a total destruction of a paradigm, and then having to rebuild from there because you're realizing that there is so much more, and everything that we're taught in sort of this mental measurement, positivist, materialist, reductionist scientific worldview, science TM. I always call it science TM and science. Science is observing patterns. Science TM is like all the structures that make it in what it is, which also influenced by funding and research stuff and all that other kind of stuff, right? But when we're actually looking at observations of these different experiences, um, realizing like, wow, there's a lot more. And, I can't tell you how many people have told me like that when they realize that they're like angry that it's now criminalized.
Yeah.
Now it went from like, why is this criminalized to like, wait, somebody's actually keeping something from us. Like
Right.
there's so much
Because you know what, Larry? You cannot, like, there's nothing, like, one thing you cannot do with a psychedelic experience is ever, like, you can never explain that to somebody. There's no way I can tell somebody what an ayahuasca experience is. I just can't. There's no way they have to experience it because
more.
mine is never going to be theirs.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's the whole idea of ineffability. There's sort of three definitions of ineffability. The first one is that we don't have words for the thing. Right. The second is that it's too sacred and we shouldn't share it with other people. So that's more of a personal ineffability. And the third one is just what like you're saying is like there's no way to describe this experience to someone who's never had the experience. Even the idea of informed consent in this world, even with mushrooms, there's no such thing as informed consent when you like have no idea what's on the other side. You can kind of tell them what might happen, but anything's game once you have, especially when you get into the 5, 7+ gram doses, things shift a little bit in a different kind of way. And so
Yeah.
how do you prepare people for that? You can just be like, and how do you prepare them without influencing them? I think that's also a concern that people have. Like, oh, I read this book, so therefore I'm seeing this thing, or I know this is what people are supposed to see. Even like with the Michael Pollan stuff, sees a lot of things that maybe he's supposed to see in his book there. And so how do you like get people to really tap into it? 'Cause you have a lot of people that are hardheads too, that maybe that, oh, okay, I get it, from this. And then you're like, then they have an experience, 5, 6 times later, they're like, oh, wait, that was the breakthrough experience. So you have that sort of introduction experiences where it's like, okay, that's interesting. But I always am curious to people like, what was that first breakthrough experience? What was that first total shift where you're like, oh, I can't go back?
Uh,
Or did I break something? Or, that kind of
uh-huh.
thing where it's like everything like comes through and you're like, wow, this is really, really profound. So
I remember mine, and now you have to remember yours, and my wife remembers hers. I
yeah,
mean, you just do.
there's a before and after.
There is a before and after. There is
Yeah.
definitely a before and after, and I'm coming from, I mean, I'm 53, right? So, I mean, in college, in high school and college, that's all we did was take psychedelics and go, see the Grateful Dead and go
Mhm.
to see shows and I mean, that's what we did. That's what we used to party with, and
Sure.
so I had a lot of experience with psychedelics, but never in a sacred way, and never, I didn't even understand back then what that even meant. So, and we have a lot of people that come to us who have had those experiences young, and then later in life remembered that there was some helpful benefits to it, and so now they're interested in trying it, at our age, which is just beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, and I think about that with integration a lot too. Is like when we started integration, they're like even within the people that appreciate what we're doing, even the people that have had a lot of experiences, like Michelle, you're speaking to, like all these shows, like even friends that are going to shows all the time. You know, it was maybe okay to be like, oh, even within your community, oh man, I went to this show, I melted my face. It was made the music were great. I saw all these colors, right? That was okay. But if you were to say to those same exact people, wow, I had this connection with the divine. I realized that we're all interconnected. Like I realized everything is alive with spirit. Maybe some people would be like, "Oh, okay, I don't know, maybe you need to go somewhere." Like, so, like, there was, like, this party element of, like,
Mhm.
whatever that might be, like, here are the things that I assume should be okay to talk about, but when you get into the deeper elements of psyche, of consciousness, of nature of reality, all that kinda thing, maybe some people are talking about it, but a lot of times people are like, "Oh, that's more than I really wanna jump into right now." So that's, again, one of the reasons we were talking about doing these integration circles because it created this space for people to talk about the weird, the unusual, the things that they never want to go to a therapist to talk about because therapists have the power of diagnosis. Okay, yeah, what is that? Okay, let me just put that on your notes here. You forever have that. So people wanted to share these really profound experiences, these weird, these wacky, these strange experiences, and in a space where they felt held by other people. And so doing these integration circles, peer integration circles. So it's not just a one-on-one, but it's actually everyone hearing from everyone else. I think that really helped to reduce the isolation that people had, and sort of the alienation that can come from these big, big experiences people.
It was the most important, impactful thing in the beginning of my journey at the integration circles with a group of people that were on the same kind of like this they had the same experience. So it was like talking to the same people, it was like it was the most powerful, impactful thing for me. You
Mhm.
know, now it's a little different, but in the beginning, I think it's very important to have that integration, to have that structure, to have those circles. And another great thing, like let's stick here for a second, like what we talked about, like the Grateful Dead and party and this. We have a huge generation here that's really picking up on psychedelics. And there's the younger generation. And, we have the ones that are the woo-woo spiritual, and then we have the ones that are using it for partying. But it's huge right now. I mean, really, this 18 to 30 is really into these psychedelics, and mostly for the partying aspect of it. How do we change this mindset? Because it's really picking up big, and I don't like it. I mean, I don't mind it at all, but I think because there's a healing aspect to it all, for sure. But we're more into the woo-woo spiritual. Let's
Sure.
let's heal ourselves. So
But I
how do we
think they're
kind of
still getting benefits, right? I mean, it's my kids who are in their 20s and they love psychedelics and sometimes they use them in ceremony and sometimes they use them at a show, right?
Mhm.
But it's I think it's still they're still getting that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I mean, I think we've all probably, and many of the people probably listening have all had these in those quote unquote recreational experience. But I can't tell you how many times I've been dancing and been slapped aside the head with spirit.
Yep.
Like, I'm like, "Oh, wow, okay, gee, well, here we are, okay." So I think
Sure.
that will lead up, and people and that's just part of their exploration, part of, like, having fun, putting this joy, this wonder, this awe, this mystery, there's a space for that, having that dance space. My bigger concern is the draw towards using technology as an adjunct to the experience, where now the technology is creating, you have these like, "Oh, we're gonna do this in a VR," or, "Oh, we're gonna do this with blah, blah, blah," and then all of a sudden it's like, "What? Your VR is closing your eyes." Like, what are you
Mm.
talking about? Why do you need a machine then to direct your experience? And I know there's probably like, a million people out there who would have something to say about this one way or the other, but
Mm,
I think that's more the watching it go in that direction is where I'm like,
mhm,
okay, or going towards
Ooh, yeah, I
the
don't like
synthetic
that.
research type of the
mm,
direction,
interesting.
where people are sort of maybe disconnecting from nature. And I think that's a key element is like we're in this sort of I like to say, there's this Susan Blackmore, I believe is her name, and Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins talks about the meme, which is like a piece of information that's shared across different groups over time that has its own sort of way to perpetuate itself, right? And then Susan Blackmore out of England talked about the team, which is technological memes, meaning that technology is now sort of self-replicating, right? And it's almost like we're in a tug of war between that and what I'm calling the plemes or fleams, I guess, if we talk about mushrooms or fungi, which is nature, is plant mushroom consciousness, right? So we're in this meme being tugged from team to plane. Where are we going to go, right? What is the best way to give us self agency? What is the best way to give us sovereignty over our own, to have our own experiences, to not be dependent upon pharma companies to make something for us, but to actually find a mushroom out of the ground, to reconnect to nature, to feel the sacredness of nature. You'll never really recreate, I think there's some nature related studies out there that are always using synthetics, right? You're not going to create that same sense of nature if you're having a synthetic. What you're going to create is when you eat this thing out of the ground and you're like, wow, nature, why is this here for me? What's happening? Why is this growing out of the ground? Like what a
Mhm,
great way to connect, and so I
mhm.
think there's something there too in terms of this conversation around how do we, as things are moving head forward into this techno realm, to also sort of be grounded in the organic and the ground into the earth, into these ancient traditions, into these plants and mushrooms that are here for us, like, it's amazing again, like go back to what we were talking about before. Why do so many plants have DMT in it? How come there's so many mushrooms that have psilocybin and psilocin in it? It's just amazing to me.
So moving forward with your mission, where's your biggest resistance?
I mean, this year was, I think, it's so funny because we were told by the people who are trying to do FDA trials, like, oh, if, we're against decrim because if you mess up, it's going to stop our studies or it's going to stop our research or it's going to stop the FDA trials or what have you. and the FDA trials failed, and that's been a bigger problem for decrim, than it should be because it's not. It's a whole different realm. But it's like now people are like, well, I heard these trials, but all this issue is MDMA. It's not even what we're talking about, and blah blah blah. People are confused anyway because everyone's saying MDMA is a psychedelic, and then you hear
Mhm.
the headlines: FDA disproves psychedelics, blah blah blah. So that's been a little bit of a tricky situation. Outside of that, I mean, we've had, it's been amazing. We have teams in Florida, we have teams in Northwest Arkansas, we have teams in Oklahoma, we have teams in Indiana and Illinois, like places that you aren't really expecting, Montana, places you aren't expecting to have this conversation. Obviously, you have the coast and Michigan, which has its own fresh coast there, right? What you call it, the East Coast, West Coast, and fresh coast. So all the areas around coast seem to be doing well, but to actually see conversations happening in some of these places that you aren't expecting, all over in Georgia, like I said, Texas is tough because, Texas unfortunately is still battling the cannabis thing where you have the attorney general there who's trying to go after everything cannabis oriented, all the resuing all the cities that decriminalize cannabis. And, you
It's
see
crazy.
the way this pendulum is swinging back and forth. You have, the biggest, the biggest thing, if you kind of watch the rhetoric right now on cannabis is, oh, I'm so pissed that we, legalize cannabis because now I can smell it everywhere. Right. So smell, that's the last thing you're at, right? You're talking about smell. I guess smell like industry all the time. I saw these cars go by with exhaust. Like, what, smell of cannabis is the biggest thing that you're like, oh, we want to throw people in jail because it smells bad.
To some it does, to some it's wonderful. I mean, it's so idiotic. I just can't imagine somebody being in jail for cannabis. It's just so silly.
And so there's that same kind of like pendulum swing with sort of some of the different plants and mushrooms as well. Although not really so much, but you see something like you know, the um, the plane guy. You saw a little bit of hubbub around this United Health CEO guy, Luigi guy. Like he'd followed Arrowhead and Michael Pollan and a couple other accounts. So everyone's like, "Oh, he must have been doing mushrooms. That's why." So like you see people trying to, or you hear this. There's this thing going on right now in surprisingly Silicon Valley, which has been inspired by psychedelics over these
Yeah.
years, right? In a lot of
Definitely.
different ways. And now
Mhm.
you're hearing this big concern around venture capitalists and CEOs of tech companies, and they're calling it one-shotting. They're getting one shot with ayahuasca, meaning they drink ayahuasca, they realize what they're doing is meaningless, and they go and live a meaningful life. Well, that's great for them, and everyone on the psychedelic side is like, "Yes, it's working as it should be." But everyone on the CEO side or the venture capital side is like, "This is horrible. We're losing all of our colleagues to this thing ayahuasca, and we're
They
going to live."
lose all their robots, right?
Exactly, exactly. So it's just, if you really kind of take the bigger, broader perspective and kind of watch, how does the pendulum swing? What are the narratives in the news? How are people presenting these ideas? Has anything changed? Nothing's changed, but it's still, it's like, so you see this back and forth. So I think it's always a destigmatization, a miseducation, re-education, campaign that's going on. That's really, part of what we're doing. Policy is one side of it, bringing the education to people is the other side, letting people know they can grow their own mushrooms. There's tens of thousands, of that 8 million people. I think 40% of them, according to their stats, either grew their own, got them from friends, or paid under $20 in the last, couple months. So
Right.
it's like, it's not, it's like everyone's already kind of doing this and it's out there.
Mhm.
Right. And so that's really valuable in terms of like, even if that rhetoric gets really strong and it, recriminalizes, everyone can grow in a shoebox in their closet or whatever.
Absolutely, it's just educating people. Like now there's something really interesting. We got Mr. Kennedy, who's very well experienced with ayahuasca. His family's been through the ringers. He has been through the experiences with ayahuasca. You have Mr. Musk, who love him or hate him. The guy's had plenty of psychedelic experiences. We're in a pretty interesting time right here. And then we got the president of the United States who's going to listen to these people. So where do you think with these two, love them or hate them, where do you think we're going with this?
Yeah, so this is and this is obviously a conversation that I'm sure you're probably in Florida. Maybe you're a little bit more on the, I don't know, generally speaking, the conservative side of the aisle, whereas maybe someone out here California is maybe a little bit on the other side. And so in our community, there's a lot of people who are very like, anti anything that's happening right now. But like, RFK Jr. met with our team in Decriminalize Nature in Georgia, and he
Mm.
chatted with them and he told them the story about ayahuasca. And he's mentioned Decriminalize Nature in a Huberman podcast. And so he's very familiar with what we're doing. Obviously, he said his son had a lot of great healing. So I think that's really positive. We reached out to him. Hopefully, we'll be able to make some connections there.
Hmm,
Um,
interesting.
my concern more so is that, there's a lot of rhetoric right now of like this, you know, okay, we'll do it, but it's only through this again. Is he going to go only to like the highly regulated medical model?
I don't think so, but
I
I am wrong.
I hope not. I know there's a lot of people out there lobbying for that model, and they
Mhm,
have the power and the money and to get
mhm,
in those closed door meetings
for
where
sure.
we don't. I'd like to, and we're trying to reach out. We're trying to connect, but I think there's some good possibilities there. I think another thing to think about is like the Chevron deference, or if where this Doge thing happens, right? Which is basically like taking out these three-letter agencies. Again, if we take out the DEA, which is the enforcement arm of the pharmaceutical company that enforces the Controlled Substances Act,
Mhm.
that could be a benefit for people. So there's a lot of different ways that this could go well. And
Can I interject right there though? When we
yeah,
talked about the DEA and then we talk about supplements, why can't we and just decrim or anybody, why can't we use psilocybin or call psilocybin or mushrooms a supplement? Why can't we just go the supplement route for these things? Why can't we go that route? I mean, that's the route we are actually trying to go, but why can't we? They're not regulated. I mean, a dandelion can get you high if you eat enough of it. I mean, it's just like, why isn't this like more of a talk?
because I think it's because I think it's because it's actually on the Controlled Substances Act. You probably have one for Florida as well as one for the federal government. There's sort of two controlled substances that control it. I don't think other supplements are on there. Dandelion isn't on there, for example. So that's the
I
biggest
got you now.
concern.
Mhm,
And then in terms of like sort of that, but also you have the Chevron deference, which basically saying like the DEA can no longer be the judge, jury, and executioner. They can only because the whole process of, for example, getting a church exempt, the
mhm,
DEA has never actually exempted any churches. They've only done it through the court system. But you
mhm.
have to like confess to the DEA and have them say whether or not you have, sincere religious belief. And they don't know the first thing. They're not the drug sincere religious belief organization, the drug enforcement agency. That's what their thing is, right? Um, so, kind of like, removing some of those powers, I think could be helpful. You still got to worry about the local state police that are still, trying to, follow the law, quote unquote. But maybe if there's less pressure from the federal government, that could help. But yeah, I think like reducing some of these government agencies, that are basically just there to, make people's lives miserable, especially around this type of thing, I think could be helpful. But yeah, I don't know that, I've had some interesting conversations with other folks in sort of the natural herb community say, hey, we're sort of natural allies here because, the FDA, that would be more the FDA control. The FDA says we can't do this herb supplement, what have you. We have to get approved by the FDA, or we have to like put a big warning label on there. This has not been approved by the FDA for blah blah blah. So there are some like it's the acupuncture and herbal medicines that way, not acupuncture itself, but the herbs that come around with it. A lot of these things are not sort of quote unquote regulated or allowed by the regulatory framework, but are still really helpful for people. So it's like you just kind of try and get outside of that box and do it on your own. Florida, I mean, I know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's okay to grow a mushroom in Florida. You just can't.
On some parts, like northern Florida, there is. So, but here there isn't. I mean, there are places, but there's cow fields everywhere, so they just go wild.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, but there's not
Yeah.
like, isn't there something? Didn't there's this? I thought there was some court case that happened. I know that happened in New
There
Mexico.
was, it was in
It was.
Tampa. Mhm,
Tampa. It's
mhm.
only for Tampa. You can't say that this set precedents for other
I
places.
can't answer that honestly. I don't know. Don't know the answer to that question. I
Okay.
don't. I should find out though.
Well, there was a shop that opened up in Tampa, and he just opened up a psilocybin, a microdosing shop, and got arrested. But that was what that was about, and he was saying that, "No, I'm going by the law that I can go out there and pick this mushroom up by pick it, and in this county, that's legal, or city, or whatever it was."
Mm,
What baffles me is the Amaranta muscaria mushroom legal in all 50 states, and it could actually kill you.
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
psilocybin's never, and let's announce this, psilocybin has never killed anyone. It's
Yeah.
never. There's not one documented death. Am I lying? Is that right, Larry, or is
I
that
have.
a
I mean, people that are detractors might say, "Well, this person did this thing and then they made a mistake, like fell out a window, drank some stuff that wasn't good for that. They had poison issues, whatever else, but nothing to do with the mushrooms themselves." But even outside of Amanita, because you can actually, I mean, there are people obviously in my ancestry's from Finland, so the Finnish use of Amanitas was really strong. You also have they can be used. You just gotta be able to be a little bit more cautious around it. You have to like, figure out you have to drink reindeer pee, which is how they did it in sort of ancient traditions, right?
Right, right,
After
right.
the eat the amanitas and they drink that. So some sort of way to metabolize out some of the toxins there. But even outside of amanitas, you can eat as many poisonous mushrooms as you want. Straight up
yeah.
poisonous mushrooms, it's not
Mhm.
against the law. So when people talk about safety, you're
Hmm.
kind of like, oh, what exactly are you talking about here? I can have 300 pounds of poisonous mushrooms growing in my basement, no limitations on it, and not one law enforcement officer is going to say a word to me about it.
Absolutely insane. So let's talk. Let's end here. How do people get it? How do people start? How do people get into contact with you? And
Well, I mean, actually, tonight, I don't know if either of you are interested. Tonight, we do have, I believe there's a Florida meeting that we're having. So the teams in Florida, we have some teams in Orlando, we have some teams in Tampa area, we have some teams in Jacksonville. So all over the state, and they're trying to work on things and make things move forward. Pretty great team there. But to contact us, you can go, we just had our new website redesigned. So it's pretty great. Decriminalizenature.org. We also have a podcast that we're doing every other Sunday as well. That you'll find that on Spotify and other places. We have our Instagram is at Decriminalize Nature. Twitter or X is at Decrim Nature. And then we have, Facebook as well, that type of thing. Meta obviously is a little bit of a difficult platform right now. I think
Oh,
we're kind
yeah.
of in a sweet spot
You
because
know,
we
we
all
say
be
fuck Zuck.
We've yeah.
That guy,
We fight with him
I mean,
every day.
is he's cultivated off he's just I mean, he's definitely does psychedelics, but he's just it's just crazy what they
yeah,
do
and
to
they
us
actually
as
donated to the all drug decrim policy in Oregon at one point in time. So it's like, what, how are you going to do that? So,
Yeah.
so yeah, so those
He
are the,
shuts us down every day almost.
every day. I'd love to be on your podcast one day. Me and Michelle would love to be
yeah,
on that.
definitely. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, we do it, like I said, every other Sunday. We do like a live episode and then we post it on wherever. But we have probably through January kind of fixed out. But yeah, let's contact each other afterwards and get a little conversation going because I'd love to hear kind of what
Absolutely.
you're all about.
Well, we love what you're doing. Thank you so much.
and I can tell the passion. Definitely see the passion, feel it. So
Mhm.
thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for doing that work. It's important.
Yeah, thank
Very
you. Thank you
important.
both for having me. And let's continue this movement and let's get some stuff happening in Florida too.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Have a great day, my friend.